Hello again, everybody. This is Ed Lynch on Surfing Baseball with Ed Lynch. I just want to introduce a very special person in my career, a very special person to the game of baseball, and that's Joe Mcilvaine, general manager, scout, just a wonderful human being, and my mentor. Gave me opportunity that other people wouldn't give me, but he did, and I'll be forever grateful. The strength of Joe Mcilvaine is his ability to empathize with young players, especially Dominican players. I've seen Joe just be like a father figure to some of these young men who come over here who are coming out of abject poverty. Joe speaks fluent Spanish, which is means a lot to these young players. But Joe's got some interesting stories on how he signed some very good players. I mean, nobody had better drafts than Joe Mcilvaine did in the 1980s and built that championship team. So sit back and listen. It's important that people understand that scouting is not always just looking at a player and say that player is a good player. It's looking at a player and say, this is what that player is going to be 5 years from now. You know, you can't look at an 18-year-old player and decide what he's going to be unless you extrapolate forward. You look at all the factors. Joe, there's nobody better than Joe Mcilvaine at that. So enjoy the episode. I hope you learned something. Thank you. Hello again, everybody. This is Ed Lynch on the Surfing Baseball with Ed Lynch show. My partner, Bob Nightingale, is not here today. In order to get these shows, the best way to do it is on social media, on Twitter, which is now called X, Spotify, LinkedIn, Facebook, Instagram, virtually all the social media sites. My special guest today is a man that has an incredible history in baseball. His name is Joe Mcilvaine, and Joe, in a lot of ways, was my mentor. He's the one that hired me my first job after law school as director of player development for the San Diego Padres. He was the new GM out there. He basically built the Mets in the 1980s into a world championship team, and it's my pleasure to have you. Good morning, Joe.
Good morning, Ed. Nice to talk to you.
Nice to talk to you. Well, today's a little bit of a dark day for the Mets. I mean, this will not record on the day, this day, but I mean, this will not be aired on this day. But last night we learned the sad news that Bud Harrelson had passed away. And I was telling Joe before we started, I always knew how old Buddy Harrelson was because he was born on June 6, 1944. For your non-history buffs, that was D-Day in World War II. So Buddy was 79 years old. And, you know, the sad thing about Buddy is, you know, he suffered from Alzheimer's disease. And Joe, when I was up at the Long Island Ducks, he was a part owner of the team. On opening day, he came in the clubhouse, and I was with Buddy for many, many years in the Mets organization, and he had no idea who I was, and that was so sad for me, you know. And
yeah,
it's the irony of that disease, and I've had family members is the people not the least affected, but the people that are most affected are not the patient, but everybody around them. You know, Buddy seemed happy as a child, you know, when he came in the clubhouse, but we couldn't let him wander outside. He might walk into traffic. So the pressure on the family members around the person suffering from this horrible disease are monumental. And, you know, his wife or ex-wife, Kim, I know she was with him till the end. I assume she was at that point. And it's very difficult for family members. But what are your memories of Bud Harrelson, Joe?
Well, I always remember him first as a player who was a very reliable shortstop. You know, his bat would contribute. He wasn't a great hitter, but his bat would certainly contribute. He'd usually hit near the bottom of the order. But if you were pitching and you were in the ninth inning and you had 2 outs and 2 men on base and you were ahead by 1 run, guess who you want the ball hit to?
Buddy Harrelson.
He was the guy you wanted the ball hit to. You know, and then, of course, as a manager and coach and in the organization as a coach, he was very, very good to the young players. You know,
yes, he was.
They empathized with him very much. He would get their attention. He would keep their attention, and he had a lot to impart.
You know, and he kept things simple. I remember our signs. I remember I go home in the wintertime and guys would say, hey, man, what are your signs? Are they complicated? And I said, yeah, they were complicated. It was bunt, hit and run, and then I'll swipe on the leg was steal. And the way we remembered it, Buddy said this, okay, Bud Harrelson sucks. Bunt and one steal. Well, we never forgot that. And you're right. I mean, he was so kind and understanding. And, not all of our players came up like Lenny Dykstra, just oozing self-confidence and let's face it, arrogance and aggressiveness. Some guys came up a little unsure of themselves coming into New York, especially when we started getting better. And he was he's a great calming influence on the club.
Yeah, I think that's generally the rule, is that when guys come to the big leagues, they kind of tiptoe in the beginning. There's been a couple exceptions. Dykstra was certainly one of them. Greg Jeffries was another one too, and it really ended up hurting him in the long run.
That's right. There's three ways to build a club: through the draft, through trades, and through free agency. And I'll tell you, free agency, you can debate the Mets' effectiveness, but I don't think anybody was as good as the Mets from the late 70s to the late 80s in the draft, certainly. And we'll go over some of the guys that you took. And in trades, I mean, look at the guys that we added through trades: Keith Hernandez and Gary Carter. I mean, that is the heart and soul of your club, offensively and defensively. How did you get started in this whole business, Joe? I know you pitched in the minor leagues, and what happened to make you decide to stay in the industry?
Well, Ed, I was a little skinny kid growing up, and
we all?
The first time I ever played baseball in an organized league, I was 8 years old in the Cub Scouts. They had a baseball team, and I did pretty good, but I was so little compared to even a lot of the other little guys. I never thought or dreamed, that something like that would be able to take care of itself in later life. But I went to grammar school and I went to high school. I went to Lower Merion High School, which is famous for Alexander Haig and Kobe Bryant. They're probably
That's one end of the spectrum to the other.
You're not kidding. They're probably the most famous grads of it. And after high school, I really didn't have a scholarship or anything. I pitched us to the championship of our league, but I was 130 pounds and about 6 feet tall, and that didn't exactly elicit a lot of interest from colleges or pro teams. So I made the decision that I was going to enter the seminary to study to be a Catholic priest. And I entered St. Charles Seminary in 1965, and I was there for 4 years. And after 4 years, I had grown. I had played in the Pendel League in the summers. I had faced some former major league players, namely Stan Lapata and Granny Hamner, that were playing in that league. And I got them out. And I realized that, hey, maybe I'm headed in the right direction. I suddenly was boomed up to about 150 pounds, But I pitched. The big break I got was one summer night in New Jersey. We had a game under the lights. And it was the first time in my life I'd ever played under the lights. And I pitched that night against a pretty good team in a tournament. And I struck out 17, won the game. And afterwards, 2 scouts came up to me and asked me what my situation was. And I told them I was in the seminary.
They don't hear that one.
That didn't exactly elicit a lot of interest, but I said I would be very interested in listening to what you have to say. And so ultimately, since I wasn't on a college team, they had 2 drafts a year at that time: a January draft for junior college players and for college players who weren't on a team. And then they had the regular June draft. Well, I got drafted in the January draft by the Detroit Tigers. And I had to make a decision whether to finish the seminary and become a priest or take a shot and see what's going to happen. I can always go back to the seminary. So I chose the latter, and I signed with the Tigers, and I went down to Bristol, Virginia for my first half season. And then I played 5 years in the minor leagues. It wasn't good enough for the major leagues, but I played 5 years, learned a lot, had a great time, and can tell you 100 stories from that. My last manager of the ones I played for was Jim Leland, who was just on his way up as a young manager himself. And my first manager was Bill LaJoy, who'd done a lot of work and been a general manager for the Detroit Tigers with a few in between. But during the course of those years, you learn about the game. You love the game. And when I realized that probably my time was over, I wrote a letter to 16 different major league teams, my favorite ones. And I got one response. The Baltimore Orioles asked me to come down. I lived in Pennsylvania, so it was easy to get down there to Baltimore. and interviewed with them about a scouting job. They had a new scouting director who'd been in the Army for quite a while, and he was very interested in the non-physical side of the game as well. His name was Dave Ritterpush. And he, along with Frank Cashin, both interviewed me, and they hired me to be an area scout. And I was going to have to move to Florida. I was just getting married and moving to Florida. And the first year I scouted, I had the state of Florida and the state of Georgia. The Major League Scouting Bureau began in 1975, and that eliminated a lot of scouts. The Bureau was the concept of the Bureau was it would do all the scouting for all the teams, and then teams wouldn't need as many scouts. Well, teams did cut back. We cut back with the Orioles to about 8 scouts and the scouting bureau. The only thing was, here I was, a 26-year-old, first-year scout. My territory expanded that second year from Florida, Georgia. Then I added Alabama, Mississippi, Louisiana, and I became the director of Latin America because I spoke Spanish. So that was all on about $10,000 a year, too, by the way, at that time. So that's how I got really going. And I was an area scout down there for about 6 years. And then I got an opportunity to become the scouting director for the Mets. Frank Cashin called me up, remembered my old interviews, and he is now it was in New York. And he called me up and he gave me the opportunity to be the scouting director. And that's how that came about. So I was the scouting director for 5 years. I was director of player personnel for 5 years. Then I went to the Padres as GM.
Before we go on to the Padres, I'd like to talk a little bit about your drafts
okay.
Because I was there. I mean, I got traded over to the Mets in September of '79 with Mike Jorgensen for Willie Montanez, and I went to spring training in 1980, and Joe Torre was the manager. And then in '81, I came up in September, did okay. I had a very good game. I didn't have a good game. I had a very good game, didn't have a good game. One of those things, when you first come up to the big league. So
you're feeling your way.
Yeah. Then in 1981, I did not make the team in spring training, but then Craig Swan came up, and then I came to the big leagues, and I basically was with the team until I got traded on June 30th, 1986. And I remember every spring I would come in and, we all line up and we'd throw. And every year, here's another guy throwing 100 miles an hour. And I used to say, I was cursing whoever's signing these guys because I'm going further down the totem pole every time you sign one of those guys, First it was, the trade for Ron Darling, which was a great trade. Ron Darling and Walt Terrell for Lee Mazzilli. You turned Walt Terrell into Howard Johnson. Then you signed of course, Dwight Gooden and Roger McDowell, Randy Myers. I mean, it goes on and on and on. And I want you to tell the story, Joe, about the workout with Lenny Dykstra out in California and all the things he was saying and the people around him, what they were saying about his running speed and his arm and all those things.
Well, prior to the draft in Southern California, we had, for want of a better term, a tryout camp. We would bring in some of the best players in the area and match them up against each other and have them play and work out for us so we could get a good close look and talk to them a little bit. And we had a number of players in that were ultimately going to be drafted the first, second, and third round in this camp. So before we're ready to start, this guy, he's about 5'8" and he's about 150 pounds, walks up to Harry Minor, who's our scout running the program there. And he says, my name is Lenny Dykstra. I'm here to play today, and I'm the best player you're going to see out there. And we looked at each other.
Sound like Tom Brady.
Well, we looked at each other and said, okay. So the first thing you do in a tryout camp is you run them. He runs 6'3".
That's a 60-yard dash.
He runs 6'3" in the 60-yard dash, which is exceptional time.
What would be the average time in a 60, Joe?
7 flat, maybe 7.1. That's about what we look at on the scale. But so he was a way above average runner. Okay, he ran the best of anybody there, just like he said. Then we got the outfielders together, and we hit them some fly balls, and they throw to third base and they throw home. Now, Dykstra, if you remember, even when he played in the big leagues, he would give you just as much arm as the play dictated. You know,
Yes.
he could give you a below average, he could give you an average, and he could give you a way above average. And that's just, he knew the situation, and he didn't want people, I guess, to see his arm until you absolutely had to turn it loose. Well, in this workout, he turned it loose and he threw better than anybody who was out there. And we took batting practice, and he hit line drives all over the field. And so I said to the area scout there, you know, just because he's 5'8", he looks to me like he's about a second or third round draft. And the area scout says to me, Joe, there's no need to do that. I said, why is that? He says, nobody's interested. You can take him anywhere. You can take him anywhere you want. Okay, so I'm the scouting director, and we come to the draft, and we run through about 12 rounds of the draft. I said, all right, it's about time. Sure enough, there he is sitting there, 13th. We pick him. We go in to sign him, and he says, I'm not going to sign unless you send me to A-ball because I'm too good for the rookie leagues.
Just to expand what Joe was saying, you know, most high school players you sign, they go to a half season rookie ball, and it's not a wonderful place to be. You're at the spring training facility. Usually you're playing in the heat, either in Florida or Arizona. You're not playing at night. You're not playing in front of anybody. It's like an extension of high school. Lenny probably played in front of more people in high school than he did if he had gone to rookie ball. So, Joe, I'll let you continue on that story.
Well, back then, Ed, though, we didn't have so much that team. So our rookie team was Kingsport, Tennessee.
Oh, okay.
At that time. But he thought he was too good for that, and he didn't want to go. So he said, well, I'm not going to sign unless you send me to A-ball. So I said, all right, I'm not going to sign you then. So he goes to Colorado and plays a couple weeks in a league in Colorado, comes back, says, all right, I'm ready to sign. But only if you send me to A-ball. Lenny, we've never done this with a high school player before. Says, I don't care. I'm too good for the rookie league. You send me to A-ball. So I did. We signed him, sent him out, and he did okay. The next year, he's in Lynchburg with Dwight Gooden, 1982. He's the MVP of the Carolina League, and Gooden's the pitcher of the year in the Carolina League, and the rest is history. They came up together, and both had great storied careers.
Yeah, and I remember when Lenny came up to the big leagues. He comes in the clubhouse in spring training, and we're all looking like, who in the hell is this guy? I mean, He's got Buster Brown shoes on. He looked like one of the clubhouse guys, and he's talking smack like nobody's business. I'm going to do this, and I'm going to do that. So, like, I'm in my 4th year or 5th year, so I'm just on him hard every day. I go, Lenny, come here. Go in the bathroom. What for, Lenny? He had that little lisp. I said, go. I want you to walk up to the mirror and take a look at yourself. You know? He'd say, Lindsay, you're hard, man. But I think you guys brought him up in '85, and I was on him every day, rookie. That was the way things were back then.
That was the initiation. That was the initiation.
That's right. Now, if you kept your mouth shut, nobody got on Dwight Gooden. Nobody got on Darryl Strawberry. Okay, they were just too good, and they were too respectful. But we were in Cincinnati. I'm pitching against Mario Soto, and I'm winning like 2-1 in the 5th inning. Lenny hits a 3-run homer off of Mario Soto. After I win, after the game, I go in and say, "Okay, you're good, kid." So I went on to the next rookie. You know, people remember Lenny as a guy like what we saw him with the Phillies. You know, he got bulked up and all that. But the Lenny that we knew, that you signed that day, and the Lenny that came to the big leagues, like you said, 5'8", 160 pounds, soaking wet. But what a player he was! He used to drive pitchers crazy. He would lead off against, say, you know, a tough pitcher, even a left-handed pitcher. He would take pitches this far off the plate. Next, you know, it's 2-0. Then he'd take a strike. Then he foul off 3 or 4 pitches. And then if the guy threw a cookie in there, 3-2, he hit a double in the gap. If it was off the plate, he would take it, then steal second. I mean, that's how good he was when he came up.
Yeah.
And heck of a career. Talk a little bit about Dwight Gooden, the difference there. I mean, obviously, Dwight was not Lenny. The area guy wasn't coming up to you saying, oh, you can take him in the 12th round.
Well, Dwight was in Tampa, and you know, he was well known. Everybody went to see him. And when it came down time for the draft, we had the 5th pick in the country that year. And now traditional wisdom, you don't take a high school player, pitcher, with the 5th pick in the country.
That's right.
But I'm not traditional wisdom. I'm going to take who I think is going to be the best player. And we had a guy on the West Coast. His name was Sam Horn. And our guys out there, and I went and saw him, said he's going to hit 30 home runs. He's going to drive in 100 runs in the big leagues. And he was a great big guy. He's about 6'5" and about 220, 230, high school.
Yeah, I played with Sam later on.
And so what happened was, you know, it came down to my choice. You know, they were both there at the 5th pick. And I said, I can take what I think is going to be a 20-game winner. Back then we had 20-game winners.
Yeah.
I could take a guy who I think is going to win 20 games or is going to hit 30 home runs. I'm a former pitcher. I'm taking the pitcher. So we took Dwight. We went in to sign him the first night, and the rest is history. You know, he just took the ball and ran with it. You know, his first year out, he showed a lot of potential. He was only 5-4 record-wise in Kingsport, Tennessee, but he went up to the New York Penn League at the end of the year, pitched in their playoffs, and did great. The next year, we put him in the Advanced Carolina League, where he was pitcher of the year and went up and pitched for Davey Johnson in the playoffs in AAA and did great. And from day one of the next spring training, Davey Johnson wanted Dwight Gooden in his starting rotation. And his harping paid off because we took him with us, and he ends up winning the Rookie of the Year, and the second year becomes the Cy Young Award winner.
Yeah, I'll tell you from the perspective of a player on the field in spring training, and I was there. And Dwight came running out, number 64. He had gold teeth. He looked like he was 12 years old, skinny.
Yep.
Well, boy, he got on that mound. It was like, boom. And then he had that curveball that was just indescribable.
He only had two, you know, Ed, he only had 2 pitches.
That's it. That's it. And, you know, his fastball was pretty straight. It was straight. He threw a 4-seam fastball, but it was 100 miles an hour on this much of the black.
Yeah.
And, but I remember him going out and pitching an inning or two in a regular game. He was in spring training. I guess that was a reward for what he did in '83.
Right.
And so he's going out there overmatching people. And one day I'm standing in the outfield with Davey, and I said, is this kid got a chance to make this team? Nah, Frank won't let me keep him. Won't let me keep him. He's going to AAA. He's not ready. Okay. 2 more outings, he goes out and shuts out the Cardinals at Al Lang Field. You know, 8 punch outs, no walks.
Right.
You know, making good hitters look bad. You know, right. And then it's like my next conversation is, Davey, are you out of your mind? This guy's not going to make the club. He goes, Frank won't let me keep him. He has to go to AAA. Goes out, keeps doing what he's doing. Finally, a bunch of us got up to Davey and said, Davey, this guy's got to make the team. He's the best pitcher in this camp. He's the best pitcher on the team. And he says, okay, here's what Frank said. He gets 1 more outing. I got to put him somewhere where it's going to be tough for him to pitch, you know. And, you know, it was I don't know exactly where it was. It was somewhere like Fort Lauderdale against the Yankees, which was a horrible place to pitch because the wind blew out every day. Mm-hmm. They had Reggie Jackson and all these stars. But he goes down there and makes them look like a little league team. And, you know, that was, you know, the next day was an off day. And then the next day we're sitting on the field and here comes Dwight come running out with number 16 on. And back then guys didn't keep those high numbers. You couldn't get rid of that high number fast enough, you know?
That's right. That's right.
So now he's got number 16 on and we're all like, hey, welcome to the team, you know?
That's right.
And to this day, Joe, I've never seen anybody, any human being throw a baseball harder than he did at the Dome, at the Houston Astrodome in his debut. I mean, that mound was about 3 feet high, and it was indoors, and you're throwing straight downhill. And he told me before the game and after the game how nervous he was. He's scared to death. His parents were there. And I remember Ray Knight was hitting for the Astros, and he was a good fastball hitter. And it was a 2-0 pitch, so Ray's cheating. And Ray swings and hits a line drive rocket, and you can't see me, that way towards their dugout, first base dugout. He didn't pull it enough to hit the bat boy over there.
Yeah.
And then he threw him the curveball, and Ray just started walking away before it got halfway to the plate. I mean, but that year, you know, he was, I think look it up. I think he was 17-6 with a 2.7, but punched out like 280 guys as a 19-year-old.
Yeah, you know, the thing was that before he was 21 years old, because the next year he won 24 games, he had won 41 games in the major leagues before the age of 21.
That is incredible.
And that's the age that when you draft a college player, you're just drafting them out of college at the age of 21. Here's a 21-year-old that's already won 41 games in the big leagues. It was unheard of.
Incredible.
You know, I think that's why I was always partial in my drafts to high school players. I wanted the youngest possible because I felt this way, Ed, and this is no slap at the colleges, but I felt like if we couldn't do a better job of developing a 17-year-old between 17 and 21 than a college could, then we shouldn't be calling ourselves professional. So I like to take all the younger players, the younger the better. And we signed a lot of Latin American kids too at 16. So we had the youngest farm system going at that time. And the typical pattern was the first half of the year, they would play even with the league. And the second half of the year, they would just take off and run away with it because they caught up and passed the league. I mean, it's not that we didn't take college players, but back then also, you got to remember this. There were 2 drafts a year. There was a January draft and a June draft. And the January draft was for junior college players and college dropouts, as I mentioned before. And what happens is that so many times when you take a high school player, he elects to go to a junior college because he's going to be eligible for 4 drafts before he transfers to a 4-year school. That the junior colleges, we got a lot of good players out of junior colleges.
Absolutely.
The January drafts, I remember Randy Milligan. I remember Herman Winningham. I remember Randy Myers. All 3 of those guys were January draft. Kevin Elster was a January draft out of a junior college. Now, today, that's changed a little bit. When they eliminated the January draft, they really hurt the junior colleges and helped the 4-year college.
Yeah. Well, I can tell you, and I've had this conversation with several parents when my son was playing and they thought their son was, every parent thinks their kid is A-Rod. I mean, that's fine. You can't rationalize with a parent about their son. You can't when it comes to baseball. So I didn't try to. But I would try to make the argument to them what you said, especially now with COVID. I mean, I'm watching these college football games and they said, well, this is his 63rd college game. I'm like, what? I mean, you've got 6-year red shirt, COVID red shirt, portal transfer guys that might be 24 years old. So the same thing obviously is going to be true in baseball. So if you're a good high school pitcher, say here in Phoenix, and your son wants to go to University of Arizona, I can tell you one thing. One of 2 things is going to happen, and both of them are bad. Either the coach is not going to like him because he's competing against 24-year-olds, or he's going to love him and he's going to pitch him until he gets hurt. And you know what? I have the right to say that, Joe. I was a college pitcher who was overpitched, who hurt my arm.
Right.
And so I never recovered from that completely.
Right.
So I would tell the parents, we have one of the best junior college systems here in Arizona. You're going to be on big fields with wood bats playing against kids your own age, And so, no, he's going to go to University of Arizona. And we call them we had a name, kickbacks, we call them, because they go there, they wouldn't play an inning, and then they kick them back, and next thing you know, they're in junior college the next year. And I would never go up and say, told you so, but that's the reality of it, Right. And again, if you want to play pro ball, you go to junior college, you're eligible for the June draft after your freshman year. You're eligible for the June draft after your sophomore year. Now you can go to a 4-year school, and you're eligible for the draft after your junior year, and you're eligible for the draft after your senior year. And if you want academics to be part of your future, which all young kids should have, after your second year, if you take all the core classes and you're a good pitcher or a good position player, that college might not, maybe Notre Dame won't take you or Stanford, but there's some quality schools, University of Florida, Florida State, Arizona State, who will take you. And when you get that degree, it doesn't have a little thing at the bottom that says, went 2 years to Yavapai Junior College. It doesn't say that. So you can have the best of all worlds. But when you're 18 years old, you fall in love with the big lights. That's why I went to South Carolina to play basketball. And if to do it over again, I probably would have gone to Miami-Dade South to play baseball. But you're exactly right. Hey, Joe, let me ask you something about, and I've talked to the Texas guys, Wayne Krifsky and people like that, who were in the room when the discussion was going on. How on earth did you guys get Walt Terrell and Ron Darling? And this is no disrespect to Maz. Maz was a hell of a major league player. But to get two young guys who within 2 years are going to be, 40% of your starting rotation, you have control over them for 6 years. How did that trade come about?
Well, we had some young center fielders coming along the way, too, like a Mookie Wilson and even a Dykstra. They were in the picture, but not Mcilvaine was getting toward the end of his career. And Texas realized they had no center fielder. Their general manager was Eddie Robinson, and their advisor was Paul Richards. And I remember they said to us, we need Lee Mcilvaine. You could take anybody you want from our farm system. Seriously. And I know Frank and I were kind of rubbing our hands together because Darling had just come out of the draft that year. He only played a half year in their system.
He was a star.
And every report we had on Walt Terrell throughout his professional career was positive, that this guy was going to be a major league starting pitcher. So when we asked them for both, we fully expected that they were going to laugh at us and say, we ain't going to do that. They said, we'll call you back. They called back and say, okay, we'll do it. And we about fell through the floor that they were going to do this. And so that's what happened on that one. I'll tell you a couple other ones too. Keith Hernandez, 1983. We're probably the worst team in baseball or close to it at that point.
I was there.
June 15th used to be the trading deadline.
That's right.
June the 14th, we get a call from Whitey Herzog, who's the GM at the time of the Cardinals.
And the manager.
I'll trade you Keith Hernandez. And we're going, whoa, this would really be an upgrade for where we are.
No kidding.
Says, I want Neil Allen and either Rick Ownby or Jeff Bidiger. Now, Ownby was a rookie in the big leagues, and Bidiger was in Double-A, a 20-year-old. So we hung up, and I looked at Frank and said, Frank, is it Ownby or is it Bidiger? It wasn't, do we do this? It was, is it Ownby or is it Bidiger? And Ownby was 25. Bidiger was 20. Let's do Ownby. We called them back, and sure enough, good to their word, they made that trade just like that.
How about the defending world champion trades arguably their best player?
Well,
halfway through the next year.
I think that came from their owner.
Oh yeah. I know.
I don't know where else it was.
Well, I understand that, but from my perspective, not knowing all the behind-the-scenes stories, I'm saying, how on earth can the defending world champion 82 Cardinals trade their best player to us?
Right.
For Neil Allen and Rick Ownby,
Right.
And then obviously it came out later about Keith and Whitey and Augie Bush and all that. And that's for another program. I'm going to have Keith on next week and he can talk to that. But
yeah, but that was the case. I mean, it was just a case that we were taking advantage of an opportunity. And it was the same with Gary Carter. When you mentioned Gary earlier, we get a call one day from the Expos and they say, would you be interested in trading for Gary Carter? I said, sure. Well, we want Eubie Brooks and Mike Fitzgerald. We need Mike Fitzgerald to take his place as a catcher, and we want Eubie Brooks, and we want two prospects from your system. All right. Now, this was going on right about the time of the winter meetings.
Yes, it was December.
And we didn't want anybody to know, and neither did they, that we were even talking to them about him. So Frank and I met with Murray Cook. Was it Murray Cook? I guess it was Murray Cook.
Yeah.
Who was the GM in stairwells. We did. And we would sit there on the steps and discuss this. And the third player that became part of the trade was Herman Whittingham, who was a nice outfielder. We figured he's probably going to be an extra outfielder at the major league level. The fourth guy was a hard one for us to do. They wanted Floyd Yeomans,
yes,
who was our second pick behind Dwight Gooden that year. But we had some questions about Yeomans's and his makeup. And his physical part of him was fine, But if that's going to get us Gary Carter, we said, let's do it. And so we agreed on it on Sunday before we left the meeting. So we said we would announce it on Monday. So we're in New York, and Frank has a press conference. And he says that the New York Mets tonight have acquired catcher Gary Carter from the Montreal Expos. And all of a sudden, and you never hear this, the crowd, the reporters and everything else all went,
it was a gasp in the crowd.
It was an absolute gasp. And then we told them, listed the players for whom we drafted. And then there was another gasp. And then all of a sudden, reporters never do this. They broke into applause and cheered because they knew, I think, that what Gary Carter was. And of course, he was the best catcher in the major leagues at that time.
Well, I'll tell you, Joe, from my perspective, I'm watching Monday Night Football, and there's no cell phones, and there's no laptops, and there's no social media. And I'm at my friend's house watching Monday Night Football. And, hey, we have a Howard Cosell. We have breaking news out of New York. The Mets have traded for all-star catcher Gary Carter, and they gave up 5 players, and those are the following 5 are, and I'm sitting in my chair going, oh, God, please no. I don't want to go to Montreal. Montreal is one of the greatest cities in the world. Love going there. You know, we all love going there, Joe. We know that.
Oh, I know.
I'm a native New Yorker. The Mets are finally getting really good. I think I have a chance to contribute, and I'm getting lower in my chairs. They're going down the list. I'm like, oh, my God. And they got to the 5th player, and it was like, whew, holy mackerel. But, you know, to the Expos' defense, they weren't going to be able to re-sign Gary. And they got a starting catcher, a hell of a catcher in Mike Fitzgerald.
Right.
An outstanding third baseman in Hubie Brooks.
Right.
And Floyd Yeomans, who threw 100 miles an hour with a quality breaking ball. But, again, this is where you've got to know your own players better than anybody else knows them. So you know, guys made that call on his makeup, and that was brilliant.
It's interesting, too, that when we traded Hubie Brooks, we went out and signed Ray Knight. But we only kept Ray Knight through the '86 World Series, where he was the MVP of the World Series. And 3 days after the World Series is over, we have to say to Ray, we're not going to re-sign you. And he about couldn't believe it because, and the reason was we had Howard Johnson. We had Dave Magadan.
That's right.
And we had Kevin Mitchell, who were all third basemen at that time. And Ray Knight was in his 30s and everything else. And we felt that it was the time to give one of these guys is going to break through. We knew that. And they all got good big league time, and we're all good like big league players. They just Howard stayed at third, Mags went over to first and moved around a little bit, and Mitch really was more in the outfield.
Yeah, but I'll tell you, I've talked to Ray endlessly about that, and he still holds a little bit of a grudge.
Of course,
Ray Knight's one of the most quality human beings you'll ever see in your life. He's a good Christian. He's a family man. He's just a wonderful teammate, a wonderful person, but he's a human being. People forget that players are human beings, and he was pissed off. He was, Joe, and
I didn't blame
he was mistreated. Now, he said he went in there before the parade, and Frank said he offered him like a contract for just a little bit more than he was making the year before. I don't know the details. I mean, but I think in retrospect, Ray has to understand, especially after managing in the big leagues, that when you got Howard Johnson and Dave Magadan and a guy that winds up winning the MVP of the league behind you, teams have to do that. You deal with your deficiencies. You don't add to your strengths. You're not going to add to a strength when you have deficiencies in other areas. So,
but you know, with Keith Hernandez and Gary Carter, we got 2 all-stars there to supplement the young players that were coming along. And that's like you said in the beginning. There's 3 ways you can acquire players. Trades are one way, and those 2 trades really made our '86 championship.
Those go down as 2 of the best trades of the decade of the '80s, and people I try to describe to people what it was like before and after Keith, and it was almost like it wasn't a time, it was a place. You know, that was New York pre-June 15th, 1983, and then there's after. That's a whole different place. And you know, in '83, Keith came in, and you can address this. He was going to be a free agent at the end of the year, I believe. Yeah. Or something like that. And so, you know, he came in, he came in and started, he was looking around, evaluating. I watched him You know, he was the toughest guy for any of us to face in the National League in those days. And I'm watching him, and he's watching, you know, Straw had just come up. Ronnie comes up a little bit after that. And he can see the good young players that we have. And I think you guys did a good job of, you know, telling him about some of the guys that were still yet to come and how this team is a young team on the come. And let's face it, Keith is one of those guys that likes the action. You know, He went from St. Louis to Manhattan, you know, and so he liked that.
Yeah, we had to sell him.
The difference in the club was when we lost a tough game in 1983 before Keith, it'd be like, all right, we gave it our best shot. We'll get him tomorrow. Hey, where are we eating tonight? When Keith came over, it was like someone walked up to your mother and slapped her if we lost. It was a personal insult to your manhood, Joe, and I'm not exaggerating.
I know you're not.
Because if I didn't get a bunt down, somebody might – I hear secondhand, hey, he's got to get the bunt down. If I didn't get a bunt down when Keith was there, he's on the top step waiting for you when you got back to the dugout. What are you doing? You know, you're costing us the game, you know, and you're like, oh, F this guy. But then you start thinking about it. I'll show him. And so I start working harder on my bunting, you know, things like that. I mean, that's what a leader is, and he was a leader.
Oh, no question about that. You know, I go back with him even farther than you did. In 1972, he was an 18-year-old in the Florida State League and playing against a 22-year-old like me, you know, at that time. So I faced him really in the minor leagues, you know, at a tender age for him. And I think even then you could see, hey, this kid's pretty good.
Yeah. Well, Joe, I want to talk a little bit in closing here about we've been on 42 minutes, but great stuff. And boy, that went by fast. That's the fastest 42 minutes of my life. But anyway, I want to talk about the like what we already touched on it. You know, when you're scouting players, you know, you've got the high school shortstop from Maine. You've got the high school shortstop from Southern California. You got the pitcher from the Northwest. You got the pitcher from Miami, Florida. You got a 15, 16-year-old kid in a Dominican. I mean, numbers are not going to tell the tale on these people. I mean, you cannot look at a high school player and look at his statistics and extrapolate those forward.
Right.
And this might sound ridiculous, but I've seen it. You don't even know who that official scorer was. It might have been his mother in high school. You know, if his bat hit the ball and he was on base, that's a hit. And I've seen that before. And so have you. So I see way too much of this now. I see them measuring skills rather than the ability to play, like, you know, exit velocity, launch angle. And I don't want to turn this whole podcast into I'm a dinosaur. I have all the answers. I'm pissed off at the baseball world. But common sense is going to tell you that people win championships, not numbers. And if you want to extrapolate a player's numbers forward, the only guy you could do that with is maybe that 26-year-old major league player that's in the middle of his career, and you're going to sign as a free agent or trade for, okay, he hit 310 last year. The chances are he's going to hit 310 next year. So, but when you're a 19-year-old kid that hits 310 in A-ball, you think you can extrapolate that forward to hit 310 in the big leagues? Do you agree with that statement, Joe?
Or even in Double-A.
That's right, even in Double-A.
You know, and I think the determining factor so many times is makeup. No doubt. You know, it's an overused word and everything else, but I learned a long time ago what to look for in makeup. And with a player, there are three major things you need to find out about, because these are the lasting qualities that are going to determine how good he becomes. Why is it if you have three players with the same ability, boom, 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 one goes forward, one stays the same, and one sort of goes backwards? It's not the ability, because the ability is the same on all three guys. It's what's inside of them. And I went to Latin America one year, and they said to me, well, Joe, it's the three C's. I said, the three C's? What do you mean? He says, cabeza, corazón, pointing to his heart, and then pointing down between his legs and going, cajones. And I thought, boy, that's as good a description as you're ever going to get of makeup. We used with the Orioles, when I first started out, our guy was really into psychological testing. And what I found out from that the three lasting qualities, the most important qualities are, and think of your successful players when I mentioned self-confidence. You got to believe in yourself.
Oh, no doubt.
The second thing is mental toughness. You've got to be able to forget that last at bat, that last error, whatever you did, good or bad, Every time you go to the plate or every time you throw a pitch, it's got to be with a clear mind. And the third thing is emotional control.
That's right.
When 50,000 people in the stands are yelling at you, or screaming at you, or booing you, or whatever, you got to just forget that and go up there. Eddie Murray was probably the perfect example of that, because he hit, I think, with runners in scoring position in his career, he hit 391, which is about the highest of any player that's ever been recorded. And it was because when we took that test with him, his emotional control was off the board. It was just, it never bothered him, the pressure, the crowd, or anything like that. And I think when you look at those two scenarios I just described, the 3 C's and the 3 qualities, the better job you can do of reading into each player, whether or not those qualities are present and what degree they're present in, is really the key to making a choice between, say, a Dwight Gooden and a Sam Horn, but that was more ability than anything else. But so many times it comes down to close decisions. And a lot of times those close decisions are because of what they have inside of them.
That's right. And I remember you told me, and it's so true, to see the true measure of a man, this true measure of any person, a woman, a high school kid, a college kid, is to observe them while things are going wrong. Everything's going badly. Exactly. I mean, everybody is Superman when they're just out there. They're up 10-0. They're playing against a lesser team. They're out there styling. Everything's great. Aren't I special? But, boy, you get them in a tough game on the road with the bases loaded and nobody out. That's when the true person's going to come out. And
well, it's funny, too. It's funny, too, because if you ask teammates, who is the guy you want up there with the bases loaded and the game on they know who it is.
Yeah.
They know who.
And sometimes they're going to give you an answer you don't expect.
Well, that's right. But they know because seen it. They've seen it in action. The hard part, though, is looking at a high school kid or a junior college kid or a college kid or a kid in the rookie leagues and being able to identify that. That's when you've got to be able to identify it ASAP, because this one you stamp, let's move this guy along because he's got what we need.
Yeah. And you can't, as a scout, you can't run in there during the national anthem and run out right as the last out of the game is being made. You've got to get, especially in pro ball, you've got to get there early. And I keep talking about scouting, and you can change an organization so much quicker through a quality trade like the Gary Carter or the Keith Hernandez than you can through the draft. Because the draft, it takes time to get the fruition of those picks. So when you're out, the most valuable scouting you can do sometimes is going out to see other people's professionals. You know that you have a valuable veteran. You're not going to be in the playoffs, and you have a chance to trade that guy. You better hit it right. And you got to get there early, see what he does in his pregame. Like you said, talk to him. I always felt the best source when I was in there pro scouting is the radio guy. Yeah. I'd sit in the press box. Hey, what kind of guy is he? Oh, he's an asshole. Oh, he's an asshole. Oh, okay. Does he show up to play every day? Oh, yeah. Plays hard all the time, but what an asshole. So I'm thinking some of the things that serve you great on the street, humility, self-examination, being nice to people. Yeah. Not that it's a detriment, but those don't translate to success on the field. Because I played with some of the greatest players I ever played with. Weren't very nice people in terms of their evaluation of their own ability, their humility, their self-examination. Like you said, Lenny Dykstra go 0 for 10, and he's up there. I'm absolutely convinced I'm going to hit a line drive off your head,
That's right.
Just super self-confidence. And that rubs people wrong on the street, but I'll tell you what, in that dugout, it's the greatest thing in the world.
Sounds like politics, Ed. It's sometimes it's tough to separate your like or dislike of a person from what you think of them in the job they're in.
That's right.
And I think the same thing holds for sports, just like you're talking about.
No doubt.
Is that you may hate the guy's guts, but darn, he can play. And you want
your financial advisor's a bag of wind. He's an asshole. He's arrogant. He's abusive. Hey, I just got you 30% return on your investments last year. Okay, you're rehired.
Well, that is so true, Ed. It's just I guess we could talk about a lot of other different things along those lines, and guys that surprise you sometimes too, because there are such a thing as a late bloomer.
Oh, yes.
There's guys that kind of float along and float along and float along. All of a sudden, boom, it kicks in or something happened or whatever. And you can't always identify what it is, but suddenly they've taken off into another stratosphere.
Yes, you're right. Okay, Joe, I think we should close it out. And this has been very informative. I hope that the people that watch, and the reason I'm wearing my Met thing today is because of the memory of Buddy Harrelson, one of the great people, one of the great Mets of all time, player, coach, manager. He will be missed. Wonderful person. So anyway, Joe, thank you so much for coming on. Hope to have you on again.
My pleasure, Ed. Thanks.